We wanted the wedding to feel elegant, Margaret. Family photos only make sense when they match the atmosphere. My future daughter-in-law whispered to me beside the ballroom entrance while a slideshow of family memories played across a 20-foot screen behind her. And that was the moment I realized not a single photograph of me appeared anywhere in my own son's wedding. I stood there holding the silver clutch I'd bought specifically for the occasion, staring at image after image flashing across the giant screen inside the Grand Briar Country Club in Newport Beach. Ethan as a little boy at Disneyland. Ethan graduating college. Ethan and Vanessa smiling on ski trips in Aspen. Ethan standing beside Vanessa's parents at a vineyard in Napa Valley. Hundreds of carefully curated memories floated across the screen beneath crystal chandeliers, while guests sipped champagne and complimented the beautiful presentation. But I was nowhere. Not once. Not even in the childhood photographs I had personally taken myself. I felt the absence before I fully understood it. Like stepping into a house that still smelled familiar, but realizing all the furniture had been replaced. Vanessa adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist and smiled politely. The same polished smile she used whenever she wanted to sound gracious while saying something cruel. I just didn't think older family pictures fit the aesthetic we were going for, she added softly. Older family pictures. She meant me. I looked back at the glowing screen where another image appeared. Ethan laughing beside Vanessa during their engagement party last spring. I remembered paying the $12,000 deposit for that event because Vanessa said her parents were tight on cash after renovating their kitchen. At the time, I didn't hesitate. Ethan was my only child. After my husband Richard passed away 5 years ago, Ethan became the center of my world. Helping him build a happy future felt natural to me. Necessary, even. I folded my fingers around the small satin purse hanging from my wrist and forced myself to smile. I see, I said quietly. Vanessa nodded once, satisfied by my calm reaction. Then she leaned slightly closer. Also, we're keeping immediate family seating near the front during the ceremony, so one of the coordinators will help you find another table. Another table. Not the family section. Not beside my son. Somewhere else. Behind us, I heard soft laughter drifting from the ballroom as servers carried trays of lobster bites and champagne flutes through the crowd. A string quartet played near the staircase, filling the air with soft classical music that made everything feel expensive and cold at the same time. I glanced toward the ceremony space through the open double doors. White orchids lined the aisle. Candlelight flickered against polished marble floors. The entire wedding looked like something from a bridal magazine. Every detail had been carefully planned. Every flower arrangement, every ribbon, every imported bottle of wine, paid for almost entirely by me. I remembered the afternoon Ethan sat at my kitchen table 6 months earlier, rubbing the back of his neck the way he used to do when he felt embarrassed. Vanessa really wants the wedding to feel special, Mom, he had said carefully. Her family can only contribute so much right now. I still remember reaching for my checkbook before he even finished speaking. Richard had left me comfortable after 40 years working as a financial advisor. I wasn't wealthy by Newport Beach standards, but I had savings, investments, enough to help my son start his marriage without debt. At least that's what I thought I was doing. Looking around the ballroom now, I suddenly felt less like a mother and more like an invisible sponsor. Vanessa's mother floated past us wearing a pale gold gown, greeting guests loudly, while complimenting the floral arrangements I had personally paid for 2 weeks earlier. Nearby, a group of bridesmaids gathered around the champagne tower taking photos for social media. Everything sparkled. Everything looked perfect, except for the hollow feeling slowly spreading through my chest. Vanessa glanced toward the ballroom entrance where Ethan stood laughing with several groomsmen. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, relaxed and happy. For one painful second, I waited for him to look over at me. To notice I was standing alone. To walk toward me the way he used to when he was little and nervous at school events. But he never turned around. Vanessa lowered her voice again. I hope you understand we're trying to create a certain atmosphere today. I nodded slowly. Of course. She smiled with visible relief and touched my arm lightly before walking away toward her bridesmaids. I remained standing near the entrance while another photograph appeared across the massive screen overhead. Ethan and Vanessa standing beside her parents beneath a sunset in Santorini. The caption underneath read, "The beginning of forever." I stared at the glowing words while guests continued sipping champagne around me. completely unaware that the woman who paid for almost everything in that room had just been quietly erased from the story entirely. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and opened my banking app. I stared at the banking screen while the noise of the ballroom blurred into something distant and muffled around me. My reflection shimmered faintly across the surface of my phone beneath the crystal lights overhead. 68 years old, pearls around my neck, silver hair carefully pinned for my only son's wedding. And somehow I had never felt smaller in my life. The final transfer was scheduled to process in less than 40 minutes. $48,000 to the Grand Briar Country Club for the remaining venue balance, premium bar package, imported floral installations, and the fireworks display Vanessa insisted would elevate the guest experience. I remembered that exact phrase because she repeated it 3 separate times during our tasting appointment in February while barely looking at me across the table. At the time, I convinced myself she was stressed. Brides were emotional. Weddings were complicated. That was what everyone kept saying whenever Vanessa behaved coldly toward me. Do not take it personally, Margaret. She is under pressure. Young women want things perfect nowadays. I had spent nearly a year making excuses for her. Standing there near the ballroom entrance, I finally stopped. Another photograph appeared across the giant screen. Ethan and Vanessa laughing together on a yacht somewhere off Catalina Island. Beneath the image, soft script lettering read, "Meant to be." I swallowed carefully and looked down at my phone again. My thumb hovered over the pending transfer notification. I should have felt angry. Instead, I felt tired. Tired in a deep, quiet way that settled into my bones like winter rain. Because the truth was this did not begin tonight. Tonight was only the first time Vanessa stopped pretending. I thought back to the afternoon she first toured venues with me last fall. We had visited 4 locations before arriving at the Grand Briar. The moment she stepped inside the marble lobby, she smiled wider than I had ever seen before. "This feels expensive," she whispered approvingly while running her fingers across the gold trim near the staircase. The venue manager handed us sparkling water and walked us through the ballroom, while Vanessa asked detailed questions about celebrity weddings hosted there over the years. Halfway through the tour, she glanced at me casually and asked, "Would your budget allow this kind of place?" Not Ethan's budget. Mine. I should have noticed it then. Instead, I laughed softly and told her we would make it work somehow. Richard used to warn me about this part of myself. You give people so much, Maggie, they eventually stop seeing the difference between generosity and obligation. I never fully understood what he meant until after he died. Losing him changed the shape of my life so completely that helping Ethan became the only thing keeping the loneliness from swallowing me whole. The house felt too quiet after the funeral. Too large. Too still. I started saying yes to everything because saying yes made me feel useful again. Yes to helping with Ethan's condo down payment 3 years ago. Yes to covering Vanessa's bridal shower at the resort spa in Laguna Beach. Yes to paying for the rehearsal dinner because Vanessa's parents suddenly claimed unexpected tax issues. Every check I wrote felt like proof that I still mattered in my son's life. Somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing that Vanessa never thanked me without sounding distracted. I stopped noticing. Ethan only called when something needed to be finalized or paid. The string quartet shifted into another slow classical piece as guests drifted toward the ceremony garden outside. A waiter passed carrying silver trays of champagne. Nearby, 2 women complimented the flower arrangements while admiring the orchids cascading from the ceiling beams. "This wedding must have cost a fortune," one of them whispered. The other laughed softly. "Well, his mother paid for most of it from what I heard." Neither woman realized I stood less than 6 feet away. They smiled politely when they noticed me listening, then quickly looked elsewhere. I turned slightly toward the ballroom and spotted Ethan near the entrance greeting guests from Vanessa's side of the family. He looked relaxed, happy, completely unaware that his mother had just been quietly pushed outside the borders of her own family. My chest tightened unexpectedly when I remembered his 7th birthday party at the lake near Big Bear. He had refused to blow out the candles until I sat beside him, because he thought birthdays only counted if mothers made wishes too. "You are part of all my birthdays, Mom," he told me back then with frosting smeared across his cheeks. The memory hit so suddenly I had to steady myself against the wall. Children grow up. I understood that. They fall in love. They build new families. But there was something colder happening here. Something calculated. Vanessa was not creating space for herself in Ethan's life. She was erasing me from it entirely. My phone screen dimmed in my hand. I tapped it awake again and reread the pending transfer details one more time. Then I opened the customer service tab for my bank. I stepped away from the ballroom before pressing the call button because I suddenly realized I could not breathe properly inside that room anymore. The music sounded too bright. The laughter too sharp. Every smiling face felt like part of a performance I had paid to watch from outside the stage. I walked slowly through the side corridor leading toward the terrace gardens, my heels sinking softly into the thick cream carpet beneath the chandeliers. Along the walls hung framed black and white photographs of old Newport Beach weddings from decades ago. Brides smiling beside fountains. Couples dancing beneath string lights. Families gathered together in neat, perfect rows. Families. The word stung now in a way I had never expected. Outside, the evening air felt cooler than I anticipated. Ocean wind drifted lightly across the terrace overlooking the golf course below. Tiny lights wrapped around the palm trees flickered against the darkening California sky, while guests gathered near the ceremony garden, carrying champagne glasses and talking quietly among themselves. Somewhere nearby, I could hear waves crashing faintly against the shoreline beyond the cliffs. Beautiful. Expensive. Carefully staged. Just like everything Vanessa loved. I sat down on a stone bench near the fountain and finally pressed the call button on my banking application. Soft instrumental music played through the speaker while I waited for customer service to answer. My hands remained perfectly steady in my lap, which surprised me. I thought I would feel emotional, angry, humiliated. Instead, I felt strangely calm, as if something inside me had finally stopped resisting reality. "Thank you for calling Pacific Horizon Private Banking," a pleasant voice answered after a moment. "My name is Denise. How may I assist you tonight?" I looked out toward the glowing ballroom windows before speaking. "I need to place an immediate hold on a pending wire transfer scheduled for this evening." There was a short pause while she verified my account information. In the distance, I saw guests beginning to move toward the ceremony seating area. Men adjusting jackets. Women smoothing dresses. Soft laughter floating through the garden pathways. A wedding beginning without me. Denise returned to the line. "I do see the pending transfer here, Mrs. Whitmore. May I ask the reason for the cancellation?" I watched the ballroom lights shimmer against the fountain water beside me. "Circumstances have changed," I said quietly. "I no longer authorize the payment." Another pause. Keyboard typing in the background. Then finally, "The transfer has been successfully canceled." I closed my eyes briefly. $48,000. Gone with a single sentence. The strange thing was I did not feel guilty. I should have. Weddings were emotional events. Families made mistakes. People said hurtful things under stress. But deep down, I knew this was not about one rude comment near a ballroom entrance. This had been happening for years. Tonight was simply the first time Vanessa felt comfortable enough to stop hiding it. I thought back to Thanksgiving 2 years earlier at Ethan and Vanessa's condo in Irvine. Vanessa spent the entire evening introducing me to guests as Ethan's mother without once saying my name. At one point, I overheard her joking with a friend in the kitchen while discussing seating arrangements for future holidays. "Small spaces force hard choices," she had laughed lightly. "You prioritize immediate family first." Immediate family. Even then she was separating me from my own son in tiny, careful ways. I remembered another moment 6 months later during Ethan's birthday dinner. Vanessa handed him an expensive watch while I gave him the vintage leather briefcase Richard carried during his early years as a financial advisor. Ethan smiled politely at my gift, thanked me quickly, then spent 20 minutes admiring the watch Vanessa bought him while everyone gathered around. That night, I drove home staring at the empty passenger seat beside me, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Parents always fear losing closeness with their children after marriage. That was normal, but this felt different, deliberate, like being slowly edited out of a photograph one careful cut at a time. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Denise's voice returned softly through the phone. "Is there anything else I may assist you with tonight?" My eyes drifted back toward the ballroom windows where staff members moved quickly preparing for the reception following the ceremony. Caterers, bartenders, floral coordinators, an entire army of people waiting for payments connected to my account. "Actually," I said slowly, "I would also like to stop authorization on any remaining event vendor transfers connected to the Grand Briar Country Club tonight." Silence. Then more typing. There are several scheduled transactions attached to this account, Denise explained carefully. Would you like me to list them individually? I leaned back slightly against the stone bench and listened while she read each one aloud. Premium catering balance. Fireworks vendor. Floral installment. Luxury transportation service. Honeymoon suite deposit at the Four Seasons in Maui. Every item sounded strangely detached from reality now, as if I were listening to someone else's life being dismantled line by line. Cancel them all, I said quietly. Somewhere behind me, the ceremony music finally began to play. The ceremony started 3 minutes later beneath white roses and candle lanterns while I remained alone on the terrace listening to music drift through the open garden doors. I did not return to my assigned seat. In fact, I never even checked where they placed me. Somewhere inside, my son was standing at the altar waiting to begin the most important moment of his life, and for the first time since Ethan was born, I felt completely unnecessary to him. The realization hurt less than I expected, maybe because deep down I had been grieving this loss long before tonight. I sat quietly beside the fountain after ending the call with the bank while guests applauded softly in the distance. The sky above Newport Beach had turned deep navy blue now, the last traces of sunset disappearing behind the cliffs beyond the golf course. Wind moved gently through the palm trees overhead, carrying faint pieces of the wedding vows toward the terrace. I heard Vanessa laugh once during the ceremony. Bright, polished, victorious. It reminded me of the first time she visited my home 4 years earlier. She arrived carrying an expensive bottle of wine and complimented every room with almost rehearsed precision. This house feels so timeless, she told me while studying the framed family photographs along the hallway. At the time, I thought she sounded charming. Looking back now, I realized she was not admiring my life. She was evaluating it, measuring it, learning exactly where Ethan came from and what resources surrounded him. Richard noticed it long before I did. After their third visit together, he stood in the kitchen drying dishes while Vanessa and Ethan sat outside by the patio fire pit. That girl pays attention to money more than people, he said quietly. I laughed at him then, accused him of being judgmental. Richard simply shrugged and handed me another plate. I hope I am wrong, but Richard rarely was. The ceremony music softened inside the garden while I stared at the glowing ballroom windows ahead of me. Staff members moved quickly between tables preparing for cocktail hour. Everything still looked perfectly organized from the outside. No one knew yet. No one understood that thousands of dollars in payments had disappeared less than 15 minutes earlier. Somewhere near the ballroom entrance, I noticed a young woman hurrying toward the event office carrying a clipboard and phone pressed tightly against her ear. Another coordinator followed seconds later, looking visibly confused. I recognized both women from the planning meetings over the past year. Vanessa used to speak to them with fake sweetness layered over irritation whenever details were not extravagant enough for her liking. Luxury weddings are about atmosphere, she once explained during a tasting session while criticizing the imported linens because the ivory shade looked slightly cheap under candlelight. Slightly cheap. The replacement linens alone cost more than my first car back in 1978. I remember Ethan sitting beside her nodding quietly while scrolling through emails on his phone, barely participating in any decisions himself. That became their pattern eventually. Vanessa spoke. Ethan agreed. Somewhere along the way, my thoughtful, gentle son slowly disappeared into the background of his own relationship. A burst of applause echoed through the terrace doors. The ceremony had ended. I imagined Ethan kissing his bride while guests smiled and cameras flashed around them. For one painful second, I pictured Richard standing beside me watching his son get married. Richard would have cried. He always became emotional during family milestones. He cried when Ethan graduated high school. He cried when we dropped him off at college in Santa Barbara. The night before Richard died in the hospital, he squeezed my hand weakly and whispered, "Promise me you will not spend the rest of your life begging people to appreciate you." At the time, I thought grief made him sentimental. Sitting there outside the ballroom now, I finally understood exactly what he meant. The terrace doors suddenly opened behind me. One of the event managers stepped outside speaking urgently into her headset while scanning the area nervously. Her expression changed the moment she spotted me near the fountain. She hesitated briefly before approaching with careful professional composure. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said gently, There seems to be an issue processing several outstanding vendor payments tonight. I looked up at her calmly. I am aware. The woman shifted uncomfortably beneath the terrace lights. The ballroom director was hoping to speak with you as soon as possible. I folded my hands neatly in my lap. I imagine he would. Her voice lowered slightly. The catering department cannot release the premium dinner service without financial authorization. I glanced through the ballroom windows where guests mingled happily during cocktail hour, completely unaware of the tension spreading behind the scenes. Waiters still carried champagne. The string quartet still played. Vanessa still smiled for photographs. For now. That sounds difficult, I said quietly. The event manager looked genuinely distressed. Mrs. Whitmore, I understand there may have been some misunderstanding tonight, but if these balances are not resolved immediately, portions of the reception may need to be adjusted. Adjusted? Such a polite word for humiliation. I stood slowly from the stone bench and smoothed the wrinkles from my navy evening gown. Then I looked directly at the glowing ballroom where my son and his new bride celebrated a marriage built on appearances, exclusion, and careful manipulation. No, I said softly. I believe the evening has already been adjusted enough. For the next 20 minutes, the wedding continued pretending nothing was wrong. That was the strange thing about expensive events. They could hide disaster beautifully for a little while. Inside the ballroom, guests laughed beneath crystal chandeliers while servers circulated with champagne trays that would soon stop coming. The string quartet still played near the staircase. Photographers still captured smiling faces beneath floral arches dripping with white orchids and imported roses. If someone walked in at that moment, they would have thought it was a perfect Newport Beach wedding. But perfection is fragile when it depends entirely on borrowed money and someone else's silence. I remained near the terrace entrance while staff members began moving faster behind the scenes. Quiet conversations replaced relaxed smiles. Phones appeared in nervous hands. 2 catering supervisors disappeared into the service hallway carrying tablets and invoices. I watched it all unfold with a calmness that almost frightened me. Perhaps because I had spent years preparing for this moment without realizing it. Years swallowing small humiliations. Years pretending not to notice when Vanessa introduced me as Richard's widow instead of Ethan's mother at charity dinners. Years ignoring how Ethan slowly stopped visiting unless Vanessa approved the timing first. Even holidays became negotiations after she entered his life. Thanksgiving dinners shortened. Christmas mornings delayed. Family traditions adjusted around her preferences until eventually none of my traditions remained at all. I remembered the final Christmas Richard was alive. Snow fell lightly outside our home in Laguna Niguel while Ethan helped his father carve the roast in the kitchen. Vanessa sat at the dining table scrolling through luxury vacation rentals on her phone and casually announced that future holidays would probably rotate between families to keep things balanced. Richard looked up immediately. Families are not business mergers, he replied quietly. Vanessa laughed like he was joking. Ethan laughed too. I was the only one who noticed Richard did not smile afterward. A sudden burst of movement near the ballroom doors pulled me back to the present. The catering director hurried across the marble floor toward Vanessa's parents while speaking in a strained whisper. Even from a distance, I could see confusion spreading across their faces. Vanessa's mother clutched her champagne flute tighter while repeatedly shaking her head. A minute later, another coordinator approached the bar staff. One by one, unopened premium liquor bottles quietly disappeared from display shelves behind the reception counter. The top-tier package had been canceled. I almost felt sorry for the bartenders. None of this was their fault. The first visible crack came when guests began asking why signature cocktails were suddenly unavailable. Confused laughter floated through the ballroom as servers apologized politely and offered house wine instead. Then came the dinner issue. I overheard one event manager explaining softly to a group of assistants that the imported seafood course could not be released without immediate payment authorization. Someone suggested switching to the standard plated menu prepared for backup emergencies. Another employee whispered, "The bride is going to lose her mind." She was right. 10 minutes later, the ballroom doors opened sharply and Vanessa appeared near the terrace hallway, still wearing her perfect bridal smile, though it looked tighter now around the edges. Ethan followed closely behind her, his expression tense and confused. Several coordinators hovered nearby, speaking rapidly while holding invoices and tablets. Vanessa's eyes scanned the terrace until they landed on me, standing quietly beside the fountain. The moment she saw me, her entire posture changed. Her smile disappeared completely. She approached quickly across the stone pathway, the heavy satin train of her designer gown dragging behind her, while Ethan struggled to keep up beside her. "Margaret," she said sharply, lowering her voice the second she reached me. "There seems to be some issue with the payments tonight." "Some issue?" I folded my hands calmly in front of me. I was informed there were adjustments. Ethan stared at me like he no longer recognized the woman standing in front of him. "Mom, the venue manager says several transfers were canceled from your account." His voice sounded stunned more than angry. Vanessa stepped closer before I could answer. "The catering company is threatening to downgrade the reception unless this gets fixed immediately." Downgrade. Such a terrible word in Vanessa's world. More terrible, apparently, than excluding your future husband's mother from family photographs at the wedding she financed. I looked directly at her for the first time that evening without softening my expression to keep the peace. "That sounds embarrassing," I said quietly. Ethan blinked hard while Vanessa's face paled beneath her makeup. "Margaret, this is not the time for some emotional reaction," she whispered through clenched teeth. Emotional reaction? I almost smiled hearing that. After everything she had done tonight, she still believed this was about wounded feelings instead of dignity. Ethan finally stepped forward. "Mom, please. If something upset you, we can talk about it later. But you cannot sabotage the wedding." The word sabotage hung heavily between us beneath the terrace lights. Somewhere inside the ballroom, the music suddenly stopped. The silence after the music stopped felt heavier than shouting. Conversations faded unevenly across the ballroom, while confused guests looked toward the band platform near the dance floor. Several servers froze beside tables holding trays of untouched appetizers. Somewhere near the back bar, glass shattered softly against marble, followed by a nervous apology from one of the staff members. Vanessa turned toward the ballroom doors immediately, panic flashing across her face for the first time that evening. Until then, she still believed this situation could be controlled quietly, fixed discreetly before anyone important noticed. But expensive weddings survive on appearances, and appearances collapse quickly once uncertainty enters the room. "What is happening now?" Vanessa whispered sharply toward one of the coordinators rushing toward us. The young woman hesitated before answering. "The ballroom director temporarily paused service while accounting resolves the authorization issue." Pause service. Another polished phrase hiding disaster beneath expensive language. Ethan rubbed both hands across his face slowly while staring at me in disbelief. "Mom, please tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding." I looked at him carefully then, really. Looked at him for the first time all evening. He suddenly seemed older than 36. Tired around the eyes. Not cruel exactly. Just weak in the way some people become when they spend too many years avoiding conflict until they no longer recognize right from wrong. "No, Ethan," I said quietly. "There is no misunderstanding." Vanessa folded her arms tightly across herself despite the warm evening air. "You are doing this because of the seating arrangement?" she asked incredulously. "This is unbelievable." Seating arrangement. As if reducing years of humiliation to a chair assignment somehow made her behavior sound harmless. I almost answered her. Almost explained everything I had swallowed quietly over the past 4 years. The ignored phone calls. The erased traditions. The subtle insults hidden beneath polite smiles. But suddenly I realized something important. People like Vanessa never listen to explanations unless consequences arrive beside them. That was why she never respected kindness. Kindness had cost her nothing. Before I could respond, another event manager approached carrying a folder and tablet while visibly struggling to remain professional. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began carefully, "without payment authorization, we are unable to proceed with the fireworks contract, the premium dinner upgrade, or the honeymoon transportation package." Vanessa turned pale beneath her makeup. "What do you mean honeymoon transportation?" she snapped. The manager shifted uncomfortably. "The private car service to John Wayne Airport tomorrow morning was connected to the suspended account authorization." Ethan stared at me again. "You canceled our honeymoon transportation?" The hurt in his voice finally pierced through some part of me, still trying not to break completely. Because despite everything, he was still my son. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bicycle in our old cul-de-sac in Laguna Niguel when he was 8 years old. He kept falling into the grass, furious and embarrassed every time neighborhood kids rode past faster than him. Finally, he threw the bike down and shouted, "Maybe I am just bad at this." Richard picked up the bicycle calmly and looked him straight in the eye. No son of mine quits because somebody makes him feel small. Ethan remembered that lesson for years, until Vanessa entered his life and taught him comfort mattered more than courage. The ballroom doors opened again behind us, and several guests slowly drifted onto the terrace, pretending they needed fresh air while obviously trying to understand what was happening. I recognized many of them from Newport Beach charity events and business dinners over the years. Wealthy people had a particular talent for pretending not to stare directly at humiliation while memorizing every detail privately. Vanessa noticed them immediately. Her entire expression tightened with fear. Not sadness, not regret. Fear. Because public embarrassment mattered more to her than family ever had. "Margaret," she said suddenly, lowering her voice again into artificial calmness, "we can discuss whatever emotional grievances you have after tonight. But ruining the reception helps nobody." Emotional grievances. There it was again. Every insult reduced to me being overly sensitive. Every act of exclusion reframed as misunderstanding. I looked directly at her sparkling diamond earrings, the custom gown, the imported flowers surrounding the ballroom behind her. So much luxury purchased with money she accepted happily while treating me like an inconvenience standing too close to the camera frame. "You removed me from the family slideshow," I said quietly. Vanessa blinked once. "What? There was not a single photograph of me anywhere tonight." Ethan looked confused immediately. "What are you talking about?" I turned toward him slowly. "Ask your wife why every memory involving your mother disappeared from your wedding presentation." Vanessa laughed once, sharp and nervous. "Oh my God, Margaret, are you serious right now?" But Ethan's face changed. Just slightly. A flicker of uncertainty finally appeared behind his exhaustion. I continued calmly before Vanessa could interrupt again. "She also informed me tonight that immediate family seating was reserved for others." Ethan looked directly at Vanessa now. "Vanessa?" She exhaled dramatically. "I was trying to create a clean, elegant atmosphere. This is being completely twisted into something else." Elegant atmosphere. Such carefully chosen words. Nearby, several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks while pretending not to listen. Inside the ballroom, the lights dimmed unexpectedly for a moment before flickering back on. Then one of the bartenders quietly began removing unopened champagne bottles from display shelves behind the reception counter. The moment the champagne disappeared, people stopped pretending not to notice something was wrong. Wealthy guests can ignore tension for only so long before inconvenience becomes impossible to overlook. Conversations inside the ballroom thinned into scattered, uneasy murmurs while servers quietly collected untouched glasses from cocktail tables near the dance floor. The string quartet had stopped playing entirely now. Even the lighting somehow felt colder without music filling the room. I stood near the terrace doors watching everything unfold with strange detachment, as though I had stepped outside my own life and become an observer instead of a participant. Vanessa remained frozen beside Ethan, her posture rigid beneath layers of white satin and lace. I could almost see her calculating how much damage was spreading through the room with every passing second. Reputation mattered deeply in her world. More than affection, more than loyalty, certainly more than family. She had spent years constructing an image of perfection around herself, and now tiny cracks were beginning to spread publicly across the surface. One of the venue coordinators approached her cautiously, holding another invoice folder. "Mrs. Carter Whitmore," he began carefully, still using her newly married name out of professional habit. "The executive chef needs immediate authorization before service can continue." Vanessa's eyes widened in disbelief. "You cannot stop dinner in the middle of a wedding reception." The coordinator lowered his voice politely. Unfortunately, several premium vendor contracts were connected to suspended payment accounts. Suspended payment accounts. The phrase echoed softly through the nearby guests standing close enough to overhear. I noticed two older women glance at each other over their wine glasses before quickly looking away. Across the ballroom, the towering wedding cake remained untouched beneath decorative lights, while photographers awkwardly pretended to organize equipment. Everything expensive suddenly looked fragile. Ethan stepped closer to me again, this time with desperation beginning to replace confusion. "Mom, please," he said quietly. "If you are upset, I understand. But this is humiliating. Humiliating. I almost laughed hearing him say it. Not because it was funny, but because humiliation only seemed real to him now that it touched his own life publicly. For years, he ignored the quieter humiliations happening to me behind closed doors. The forgotten invitations. The changed holiday plans. The way Vanessa slowly transformed my presence into something optional. I remembered the afternoon Ethan and Vanessa toured retirement communities with me after Richard died. Vanessa insisted she only wanted me to consider downsizing for convenience. We visited a luxury senior complex in Dana Point with ocean views and scheduled activities. During lunch afterward, Vanessa casually pointed toward a small studio floor plan brochure and said, "Honestly, one person does not need much space." One person. As though the home Richard and I built over 37 years became meaningless the moment I became widowed. Ethan said nothing then either, just stared into his iced tea while Vanessa spoke for both of them. Tonight felt strangely similar. Vanessa controlled the atmosphere while Ethan struggled weakly behind her, trying to smooth over damage he never prevented in the first place. A sudden commotion near the ballroom entrance interrupted my thoughts. The fireworks coordinator was leaving. Two staff members rolled equipment cases through the lobby while speaking hurriedly into headsets. Several guests noticed immediately. I heard someone whisper, "I thought there was supposed to be a fireworks finale tonight." Another guest answered softly, "Apparently there is some issue with the billing." Billing. Such a small word capable of unraveling an entire evening. Vanessa looked like she might collapse from sheer panic. "This cannot be happening," she muttered under her breath while gripping Ethan's arm tightly. Then she turned toward me again, dropping all pretense of politeness completely. "What exactly do you want from us?" she asked sharply. The question hung in the air between us while nearby guests pretended not to listen. I looked at her carefully before answering. For the first time since meeting Vanessa, I realized she genuinely did not understand what she had done wrong. In her mind, people existed in categories. Useful people, impressive people, expensive people, temporary people. Once someone stopped fitting the image she wanted, she quietly moved them aside, including me. "I wanted respect," I said softly. "Not because I paid for this wedding. Because I am your husband's mother." Ethan lowered his eyes immediately. Vanessa stared at me in stunned silence for half a second before scoffing lightly. "This is unbelievable. We are talking about seating charts and photographs." "No," I replied calmly. "We are talking about erasing someone while still expecting them to keep financing your life." The words landed harder than shouting would have. Vanessa's face tightened visibly while several guests nearby exchanged uncomfortable looks. Ethan finally spoke again, though his voice sounded weaker now. "Vanessa, did you really remove Mom from the slideshow?" She exhaled dramatically and threw both hands upward in frustration. I streamlined it. The presentation was already too long. Streamlined it. I watched realization slowly begin settling across Ethan's face piece by piece. Not fully. Not enough yet. But something inside him was finally shifting. Then one of Vanessa's bridesmaids hurried across the ballroom, toward us holding her phone tightly. Her expression looked nervous. "Vanessa," she whispered urgently. "People are posting about the reception online already." Vanessa grabbed the phone instantly. I saw her eyes widen while reading comments spreading across social media from wedding guests confused about the halted service and disappearing vendors. One post included a photo of bartenders removing premium champagne from the reception bar. Another showed the untouched wedding cake beside the caption, "Guess somebody forgot to pay the bill." Vanessa looked physically ill. Not because she hurt me, because people were watching. Vanessa stared down at the phone in her hands while the color slowly drained from her face beneath the ballroom lights. Around us, the reception had begun unraveling in quiet, expensive layers. Guests whispered behind half-empty wine glasses. The dance floor remained untouched. Several servers stood near the kitchen entrance waiting for instructions nobody seemed able to give. Across the ballroom, the towering wedding cake sat glowing beneath decorative spotlights like a centerpiece for a celebration that no longer existed. Ethan looked from Vanessa to me with growing unease. "What are people posting?" he asked quietly. Vanessa locked her phone screen immediately. Nothing important. But one of the bridesmaids shifted awkwardly beside her. "Actually, there are videos already." Ethan frowned. "Videos of what?" No one answered right away. Then the bridesmaid slowly held out her own phone toward him. Some guests recorded the argument with the venue staff earlier. Ethan took the phone carefully and stared down at the screen. I watched his expression change almost immediately. Confusion first, then discomfort, then something heavier settling behind his eyes. On the screen, Vanessa stood near the ballroom entrance less than an hour earlier speaking to one of the coordinators while several bridesmaids laughed nearby. The audio was imperfect because of background music, but certain sentences came through clearly enough. His mother does not need to be in every family photo, Vanessa said sharply in the recording. She already got enough attention by paying for everything. Laughter followed. Not loud, not cruel exactly, just casual enough to make it worse. Then another voice asked, "Did she notice she was cut from the slideshow?" Vanessa laughed softly before answering. "Honestly, she notices less than people think." Ethan stared frozen at the screen. Beside him, Vanessa's posture tightened instantly. "That video is completely out of context," she said quickly. Ethan kept watching silently. Another clip began automatically. This one showed Vanessa near the bridal suite earlier that afternoon, speaking with two event assistants. "Please keep his mother away from the front reception photos," she instructed while adjusting her earrings in the mirror. "I want the pictures to feel clean and elevated." Elevated. The same word she used repeatedly during planning meetings whenever she wanted to remove something she considered embarrassing. Ethan lowered the phone slowly. For several long seconds, he said nothing at all. The ballroom noise faded strangely around us, while guests pretended not to stare directly in our direction anymore. But they were listening. Everyone was listening now. Vanessa stepped closer to him immediately. "Ethan, these are private conversations recorded out of context. Your mother is blowing this completely out of proportion." Her voice sounded sharper now, less polished. Fear was beginning to crack through the careful image she spent years building. Ethan looked at her differently for the first time since I had known them together. Not lovingly, not defensively, like someone suddenly realizing they may have ignored warning signs for far too long. "You cut my mother out of the wedding?" he asked quietly. Vanessa threw her hands upward in frustration. "Oh my God, Ethan, this was about aesthetics. Every bride organizes photographs. You removed her from the family slideshow. It was already too long. You told the coordinators to keep her away from pictures, because she always inserts herself into everything." The moment the words left Vanessa's mouth, silence spread around us again. Even she seemed to realize too late how awful they sounded spoken aloud publicly. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. "Inserts herself?" he repeated softly. Vanessa exhaled sharply, clearly losing patience now that control had slipped from her grasp. "Ethan, your mother has spent years making every important moment about herself. The wedding was supposed to be about us for once. Us." I almost pitied her hearing that. Because Vanessa genuinely believed love and attention were limited resources people fought over instead of shared. She never understood family. Because she viewed every relationship like a competition for status and control. Ethan looked exhausted suddenly. Older somehow. He glanced toward me slowly, and for the first time all evening I saw shame in his eyes. Real shame. Not embarrassment over the reception. Shame over me. "Mom," he said quietly, "why did you not tell me this was happening?" I could have answered 100 different ways. I could have reminded him about every ignored holiday invitation, every changed plan, every subtle insult he pretended not to notice because confronting Vanessa felt inconvenient. But standing there beneath those ballroom lights, I realized something painful. Ethan already knew more than he wanted to admit. He simply chose comfort over confrontation for years. Because every time she pushed me aside, I answered softly, "You asked me to keep the peace." Ethan lowered his eyes immediately. Vanessa scoffed under her breath. "This is unbelievable. We are standing in the middle of our wedding, and somehow I am being turned into a villain over photographs." Then one of the venue managers approached again carrying another folder. His face looked tense but professional. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore," he began carefully, "without financial resolution tonight, the ballroom must close service within the hour." Vanessa stared at him in horror. "Within the hour?" The manager nodded apologetically. "Several vendors have already withdrawn premium services due to unpaid balances." Somewhere across the ballroom, staff members quietly began dimming decorative lights near the dance floor. The photographers packed away extra equipment. The expensive illusion was disappearing piece by piece. Vanessa looked around the room at the watching guests, the disappearing staff, the phones recording quietly from corners of the reception hall. Then she finally looked back at me with something colder than anger in her eyes. Hatred. I left the reception 20 minutes later without saying goodbye to anyone. By then, the ballroom barely resembled the glamorous celebration Vanessa spent a year designing. Half the decorative lighting had been shut down to reduce unpaid service costs. The premium seafood dinner was replaced with a simplified plated meal guests picked at awkwardly while pretending not to notice the tension spreading through the room. The dance floor remained empty. Conversations happened in whispers now instead of laughter. Even the photographers had stopped directing people for stage portraits because nobody knew where the bride and groom were anymore. Ethan stood near the ballroom entrance arguing quietly with Vanessa while her parents hovered nearby, looking horrified and embarrassed. At one point, I saw Vanessa point directly toward me while speaking sharply through clenched teeth. Ethan did not answer her. He simply stood there staring at the floor like a man waking up too late inside his own life. I felt no satisfaction watching it. That surprised me most of all. I thought revenge would feel victorious. Instead, it felt quiet, heavy, like finally setting down something painful I had carried too long. Before leaving, I stopped briefly near the ballroom doorway and looked inside one final time. The giant slideshow screen still glowed softly against the far wall. Images of Ethan and Vanessa continued rotating automatically behind confused wedding guests and exhausted venue staff. Still no photographs of me. Somehow that no longer hurt. Because for the first time all evening, I understood the truth clearly. People can remove your image from a screen. They can remove your seat from a table. They can even remove your name from conversations. But they cannot erase the years you spent loving someone honestly. That part remains whether they honor it or not. I walked slowly through the marble lobby carrying my silver clutch beneath the soft chandelier lights. Outside, cool ocean air wrapped around me as valet attendants rushed nervously between arriving vehicles and confused vendors preparing to leave early. Somewhere behind me, raised voices echoed faintly through the ballroom entrance before quickly disappearing again beneath the closing doors. I did not turn around. My car waited near the front drive beneath rows of white roses and lanterns originally meant to guide guests toward a fireworks finale that would never happen. The young valet looked startled when he recognized me. "Leaving already, Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked politely while opening the driver's side door. I smiled faintly. "Yes, I think I have stayed long enough." The drive home along Pacific Coast Highway felt strangely peaceful despite everything that happened. Newport Beach glittered quietly outside my windows while moonlight reflected across dark ocean water beside the cliffs. Expensive restaurants still buzzed with late-night conversations. Couples still walked hand in hand along the sidewalks. Life continued exactly as it always had. Only something inside me had changed permanently. Halfway home, my phone rang through the car speakers. "Ethan." I stared at the dashboard for several seconds before answering. Neither of us spoke immediately. I could hear distant ballroom noise behind him mixed with muffled voices and movement. Finally, he exhaled shakily. "Mom." The single word sounded smaller than I had heard from him in years. "Are you all right?" I asked quietly. He laughed once under his breath, exhausted and hollow. I do not even know how to answer that anymore. Silence filled the car again while headlights passed across the windshield in soft waves. Then Ethan spoke more quietly. "You were right." I tightened my hands slightly around the steering wheel. "About what?" Another long pause. "About me asking you to keep the peace all these years." The sadness in his voice reached somewhere deep inside me despite everything. Because underneath the expensive wedding disaster and the ruined reception stood one simple, painful truth. I missed my son. Not the man standing beside Vanessa tonight pretending not to notice cruelty until it touched him personally. The boy who waited for me before blowing out birthday candles. The young man who called every Sunday after college just to ask how my week was going. Somewhere along the way, that version of Ethan slowly disappeared while I kept pretending patience alone would bring him back. "Mom," he said carefully, "I did not know she removed you from the slideshow. I believe you. I should have noticed more things sooner." The honesty in that sentence mattered more to me than apologies ever could. Tears finally burned behind my eyes for the first time all evening, though my voice remained steady. "Yes," I answered softly. "You should have." He did not argue, did not defend himself. For a moment, All I heard was his breathing through the speakers while traffic lights reflected across the windshield ahead of me. Vanessa left the reception, he admitted quietly. Her parents took her back to the hotel. I said nothing. I do not know what happens now. I thought about the ballroom, the vanished champagne, the silent dance floor, the empty space where family should have been. Then I looked out toward the dark Pacific stretching endlessly beside the highway. Neither do I said honestly. Another silence passed between us. Softer this time, less angry. Before ending the call, Ethan spoke once more in the small, uncertain voice I had not heard since he was a teenager. I am sorry, Mom. I closed my eyes briefly at the red traffic light ahead of me. Then I whispered the truth I finally understood tonight after years of shrinking myself to make others comfortable. So am I. When I reached home, I walked through the front door of the quiet house Richard and I built together over nearly 4 decades. The rooms felt still, familiar, safe. For the first time in years, the silence did not feel lonely at all.